Hello and welcome to this presentation on grief and loss presented by the Counseling Center. Just some quick information about our Counseling Center here at MSU. There are several ways to get a hold of us or find out more information. You can give us a phone call at our office. You can also email us, or you can check out our website. We have a ton of different resources available for all students here to check out, kind of learn more about, do some self-guided stuff. So lots of different resources there as well. If you just go to mnsu.edu/counseling, you'll find all that information. All right, to start with today, like I said, our presentation is going to be on grief and loss. So we're going to first start with some definitions of those. And we're going to transition to some facts and information, discuss different types of loss, go through the stages of grief, and then finish off with some ideas of what we can do to kind of get through this challenging time and cope with some of these feelings and emotions that we might have when we experience a loss or are feeling kind of sad about something being lost or taken away or gone. So to start with, we're going to just define what is grief. Grief is defined as a deep sorrow. Grief is a natural response to a loss. We also know that grief is an emotional suffering that we feel when someone or something is taken away from us. And oftentimes this grief may feel very overwhelming. And so when we discuss what grief is, or when we use it in context, just know that it's like this really intense, deep sorrow that a lot of people experience. It can be really overwhelming and pretty intense at times. We also discuss like what is loss, and we kind of use these terms interchangeably since they do have pretty similar definitions, as you can see. So we say that loss is having someone or something leave or be taken away from us. And so while that sounds pretty similar to one of the definitions I had there for grief, just know that loss might be seen differently or experienced differently by some people. Loss might not be as intense as grief, but that doesn't make it any less necessary to talk about. And so when I use these two terms throughout the presentation, just know that there's a lot of similarities, and then each person experiences grief and loss in different ways. We're going to focus first here on ambiguous loss. And so this might be a new term for you, something you haven't really heard of before or dealt much with, but we define ambiguous loss as a loss that occurs without closure or clear understanding. This type of loss leaves a person searching for answers. And oftentimes, ambiguous loss complicates and delays the process of grieving, oftentimes resulting in unresolved grief. And so ambiguous loss is pretty intense, right? And so it's a type of loss where something is taken away from us or something leaves our lives, but it happens without closure. No clear understanding, maybe no reason behind it. So it leaves us with a lot of questions, a lot of unanswered answers, things like this. And then it complicates and delays that grieving process. And so in a couple slides, when we talk about the stages of grief, with ambiguous loss, it's harder to get through those stages, right? Because we don't have those answers. And we don't have a clear understanding of either what happened or why it happened. And this just makes that process so much harder. And then, like the definition says, it results in unresolved grief. Maybe we carry this grief with us for a long time. Things like that. So to help make this a little more clear, I'm going to go over a few different types of ambiguous loss, and just so you get a better understanding of what I mean by ambiguous loss. So the first one I have here is divorce. And so when we know, or when someone we know gets a divorce, oftentimes we can define this as a goodbye, but without leaving. So the person that we were either partnered with or married to or in a relationship with, when they leave, they're saying goodbye. but they're still present, maybe in our lives, in our community. They're still here on earth with us, but we're not in that relationship with them. Maybe there's children or pets involved, and so you still see them from time to time. Um, but there's a goodbye. There's no more connection. There's the distance between you guys, yet they're still here. So that's what we describe as like a goodbye, but without leaving. And that's just another type of ambiguous loss. War is another really common one with ambiguous loss. Oftentimes when we see a loved one off or a friend off to war, we want them to come back. We anticipate them coming back. And so when they don't come back, or when they're described as missing in action, and there's no clear like reason why they're not coming home, or there's no like burial service or anything else, this can be really hard. This has no closure. This oftentimes is confusing, and it doesn't make sense why our friend or loved one didn't come back from war. And so we might describe this one as leaving without goodbye. So we know that they were leaving for war, but we never had a formal goodbye, right? It was more like a we'll see you later when they left for war, but not that formal goodbye. And so that really complicates the grieving process. Depression is another type of ambiguous loss. Oftentimes when people slip into depression, they become so overwhelmed with their sadness and their feelings that they're not present in our lives anymore. And so the person we used to know just isn't there. This goes along with dementia and Alzheimer's too, with individuals who develop this, this disorder, this Alzheimer's, and they're still present with us, right? So they're still here, but we've said goodbye to who they used to be. They're not who they used to be anymore. Maybe they can't remember you, or can remember you but can't remember the memories that you guys have shared. And so we really kind of said goodbye to that old person, but they haven't left yet. They're still here. And so this is a really confusing phase of grief and sadness that people go through, because maybe they lost that person. They lost that person who they used to know, but yet their physical body is still here. And so this is another type of ambiguous loss that people might experience. There's also different types of relationships that have ambiguous loss, whether this is through affairs, maybe working too much or spending too much time in the office or at school or something. When your significant other or even you spend too much time with a different person, or too much time working, you're not checked into that relationship anymore. And so that person might describe it as a loss, right? Their significant other, their partner in life isn't there mentally or emotionally anymore. And yet they're still present, right? They still come home. They're still, eating out of your fridge and all this kind of stuff, but they're not checked into the relationship anymore. And so this can be like a confusing, kind of complicated loss that people go through. Moving away from family, whether this is moving to college, moving to different states, maybe it's getting married and starting a family somewhere else. Moving away from family is a huge loss. Again, this is saying goodbye, but without leaving, right? So you're saying goodbye to that home, to that community, to those family who are right there. And you're saying goodbye to them because you're moving maybe far away, but they're still present. They're still in your life. They're still there, but it's not the same anymore. And so this is a type of ambiguous loss that people experience. We know with COVID-19 and the global pandemic that we know that there was a ton of loss that has happened and continues to happen with this COVID-19. Loss of employment, loss of financial stability, loss of different celebrations, different holidays, Maybe there wasn't a wedding in your family. Maybe there wasn't a community like graduation party or anything like this. So there's a huge loss, right? And so these celebrations, these events, these moments with family were taken away from us, even though everyone was still here. So this is a type of ambiguous loss that people go through and experience and kind of have to deal with. Chronic mental illness like bipolar, schizophrenia, again, this is a lot like depression and Alzheimer's. When someone has a chronic mental illness, they're still physically present in our lives, but maybe they're checked out mentally, emotionally. Maybe it's hard to deal with their disorder, their chronic mental health illness. And so it's a loss. That person you used to know, used to be friends with, used to love, this isn't the same anymore. And so it's hard to grieve this since they're still physically present with us, but they're not really there. Emotionally, mentally, they're just not there. And so this is a hard loss for some people. And then addiction, when people become addicted to drugs, alcohol, gambling, even eating disorders, anything like that, this addiction takes our friends and our families away from us. We no longer have that person who we used to know, right? Because they become so consumed with their addiction. And so again, this would be defined as, that goodbye without leaving. And so, you can say goodbye to them because the person you used to know isn't here anymore, but they're still in your life. And so, addiction can be a hard, ambiguous loss that some people, family, friends have to deal with, and it's hard to define or describe this and move forward with it too, when you never know what's going to happen. So there's other types of loss too. So these ones might be some from the other list like we talked about, but these are just other types of losses that people experience. And know that loss can come from a wide variety of causes. So maybe there's something on this list that I missed, or there's something that you would add to this list. And that's completely okay. Everyone has different losses in their lives. But this just gives you an idea of some different types of losses, like death of a loved one, death of a pet, divorce, breakup in a relationship. That might be with a significant other, family, even best friends. Loss of health, loss of a job, which might lead into then a loss of financial stability. A miscarriage is a type of loss. Retirement, right? Because you're losing that working family. You're losing that job that you had for so many years. Loss of a dream. Let's not discount this one. When we have a dream, we have something that we're fighting for, we have something that we want to achieve. And when this isn't possible anymore, that's a huge loss. And there's a lot of emotions that go along with this and different feelings. Loss of a family member or friend to a serious mental illness. We talked about that on the last slide. Loss of a friendship. Loss of safety after a trauma. If you don't feel safe in your own home anymore, there's this huge loss then, and it's hard to describe. Selling the family home, moving, changing jobs, these all kind of go together. Loss of what used to be. Graduating from high school or college, we know that this is a different type of loss, and many people maybe are happy with it, but then again, there's a lot of sadness tied to it too. You're leaving behind classmates, you're leaving behind friends, a school you were familiar with, just the normalness of maybe high school when you transition into college. Then this is a huge loss that a lot of people go through and experience in some way, shape, and form. And then the global pandemic, like we talked about in the last slide too, it's just another type of loss that a lot of people are experiencing right now. So loss and grief can affect us in a lot of different ways. We're going to focus here on some of them and how they like change our feelings, or how we can experience this like in the feelings when we experience grief and loss. So some changes in our feelings might be shock, anger, disbelief, resentment, pain, regret, intense sadness, a feeling of abandonment, longing, anxiety, worry, and even guilt. And this might be about the past. Like maybe we lost a family member, to cancer or to something else. And there's guilt maybe that you didn't spend a lot of time with them before they passed away, or that you didn't withhold a promise to someone before they passed away. There's a lot of guilt in that. And there also might be guilt about being happy in the future. Maybe you lost something or someone, and it was for the better, right? And so while everyone else might be sad about it, or might be upset about it, you're actually kind of happy for what the future holds. Then maybe you're moving to a different state with your family, and while your children, your spouse, maybe your siblings, they might be sad about it, but you see it as a fresh start. And so there might be some guilt about this then, about feeling happy for this when everyone else is feeling sad. And that's okay, right? This is just a feeling we experience. We know that everyone's situation is different. And so these are just some changes in our feelings then. There's definitely more we could add to this list, make it kind of personalized, but these are just the ones that are pretty common that a lot of people note. We also know that there's changes in our thoughts. And so when we experience grief or loss, oftentimes we find ourselves thinking about it all of the time. It's pretty consuming. We also have challenges with concentration, especially if we're thinking about it all the time. It might be hard to focus in the classroom, maybe at work, maybe when someone's talking to you. It's just hard to concentrate because you're thinking about that loss or that sadness all the time. We might also find our mind wandering, have trouble focusing. There are a lot of different changes in our thoughts that might happen. We also know that it might be hard to care about things you normally cared about. So maybe you're really passionate about studying, or maybe you're really passionate about some topic, right? And you could talk about it all the time. But then a grief happens, and a loss occurs, and now that care, that motivation to talk about it just isn't there anymore. You might also feel like nothing matters anymore, and thoughts like that might go through your mind. You also might think that the world doesn't make sense anymore, especially with some of those ambiguous losses. Like if someone was taken away from you way too soon, or if you don't have that closure when someone leaves your life or something leaves your life. You might wonder like, what's my place in this world? This doesn't make sense anymore. Why am I experiencing this? There's a lot of thoughts that go through our mind when grief and loss happens. There's also significant changes in our bodies too. Grief and loss isn't just an emotional thing that we experience in our heads all the time. It happens throughout our body as well. It might be, shown in headaches, stomach aches, body aches, changes in our weight because we're having a hard time eating, or maybe we're eating too much. And so if our eating patterns are all kind of messed up, we're going to have changes in our weight as well. We're also going to notice maybe some changes in our sleep. Maybe it's really hard to fall asleep after this grief or this loss happens because, our minds are constantly swirling with all those different thoughts and emotions. So it's hard to kind of fall asleep at night. Maybe for other people, they're sleeping all of the time, just to kind of like numb themselves to the pain or to get out of those thoughts. They just sleep. So there's a lot of different changes in our sleeping patterns. And sometimes that causes us to be more tired. But we do know with changes in our sleeping and our eating, even our exercising, we're more susceptible to illness And then we have this general feeling of being kind of run down and sick. And so these are some changes that we do notice in our body when we're experiencing a lot of sadness or grief after a loss occurs. There also might be some changes in what we do, right? So some people might not feel like doing anything. Some people just have trouble finding energy to get through the day. Others, maybe there's a complete opposite. Maybe they become extremely busy to help get through this loss. Maybe they fill their day with classes and work and this and that and everything else just to stay busy, right? So that they don't have a chance to let their mind wander to those thoughts or to those sad feelings again. And so there's a lot of changes in maybe what we do, and just know that it's very individualized. I'm not saying you have to feel one way or the other, but this is just some common feelings or changes in what we do that many people go through when they experience a grief or a loss. So now onto the stages of grief. We know that there's 5 different stages to the grieving process. And so usually it starts with denial. And kind of like the question that pops into a lot of people's mind is like, this can't be happening to me. They're denying that someone has passed away. They're denying that something bad is going to happen or that something's going to take place, be lost, anything like that. Denial. And next is anger. Anger, why is this happening to me? Kind of questioning who's to blame. Trying to find that person to blame kind of makes it feel a little better, but there's just so much anger. Like, why is this happening all the time? The next is bargaining. Make this not happen and in return, I will do blank, 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 right? So trying to bargain with other people. Maybe we might see this more in like a divorce situation, or even bargaining after someone gets a diagnosis, trying to bargain with the doctors. It's not going to work, but it's something that everyone tries, right? We're trying to bargain our way out of it because we're so angry and we're still maybe in denial. Eventually, we transition then into depression. So kind of like, I'm too sad to do anything. Just kind of intense feelings of sadness, kind of confused, don't know what to feel. So you just kind of slip into feeling either nothing or just pretty sad. And then finally, we get to acceptance. And this is what we want to achieve with these stages of grief. Most people, they go through all these stages and eventually get to acceptance. And this is when we can say, I'm at peace with what happened. Maybe I understand what happened. I accept it. Acceptance takes time, and it takes dedication, and it takes work sometimes to accept a loss. And we know with ambiguous loss, it's hard to get to this stage. It's hard to accept it, maybe when we don't have all those answers. Maybe when we don't know why it happened. It's hard to accept it then. And so we might stay in one of these other 4 stages. And we'll bounce between several of them for quite some time and maybe never get to that acceptance. But these are just the stages of grief. We know that they come from research, that they've been studied, and they do a really good job of explaining, the grieving process for a lot of people. So what can you do? There are healthy ways to deal with the loss, to cope with the pain, and in time ease that sadness that you feel. In time, being able to come to terms with your loss, find new meaning, and eventually move on with your life is the goal. And so here are some ideas of different ways that we can make life maybe a little bit easier for us. The first is to kind of establish some healthy habits. This might be from eating balanced meals, eating maybe at normal times, getting in all your nutrient groups, drinking plenty of water. We know this is super important and very beneficial to our health. Exercising regularly. It might be hard to get back out there right away after we experience a loss, but if that was something you did before the loss happened, it's important to put that back in your life, or recreate a new healthy habit of trying to exercise more regularly. Establish healthy sleeping patterns. We kind of talked about this before, that sleep might be hard or it might come really easily after a loss. But we want to make sure we're sticking to some pretty healthy sleeping habits, have some good sleep hygiene, as this will help our overall mental state, our emotions, even our physical bodies. And then even to practice self-care. This is a really important healthy habit to have. Self-care can be from a wide variety of different things we can do for ourselves, but self-care is really just taking care of yourself and doing what your body needs at the time. And so self-care is super important, and it shouldn't be forgot about after we have a loss or when we're coping with some of these feelings. Try to get back into life. Sometimes we trap ourselves in our house after a loss, or when we're feeling kind of down and sad, but get some fresh air. Get out of the house, go for a walk, enjoy the scenery around you. Fresh air does the body wonders. And so not forgetting this, and it kind of helps us get motivated to get back out there. Give yourself permission to do something you previously enjoyed doing. So maybe before the loss happened, you used to play the piano every day, and then you stopped after this loss. Give yourself permission to play music again. Give yourself permission to go for a run again. Give yourself permission to laugh again. Listen or play the music. This is a great way to get back into the swing of things. Maybe watch TV. Maybe you kind of like blacked everything out. So try watching TV again. Play sports. Hang with friends. This is another great thing to kind of get you back out there. It might be hard at first, but kind of putting yourself back out there, it's going to help with that grieving process. Take it easy on yourself. If nothing else, please remember this. We also want to know that it's okay, right? And so accept that grief hurts and that it takes time to heal. This, grief is not going to go away in one day. It's not just going to disappear and everything's going to be better again. It's going to take time and it's going to hurt before it starts to get better. So just take it easy on yourself. Don't try to rush things, or that might just prolong it a little bit more. It is acceptable to feel confused, overwhelmed, angry, anything else even. There might be a whole host of emotions and feelings and expressions that we could add to this, and that's okay. It is completely fine to feel overwhelmed or super angry that, something happened. It's also okay to have a good cry. Maybe that's just what we need to kind of release that emotion, to let go of what's kind of built up inside. It's just to cry it out. Maybe even sharing that you're hurting with someone that you know, that you trust. This is a great way to find support from another person. Or maybe just finding a support group, whether this is in person, like from a counseling center, or even online. There's a lot of different support groups out there that you can find. Kind of share your experience with others, maybe who are going through the same thing. Kind of lean on people who've been going through the same things you are. Support groups can be really beneficial. And then finally, just some things to remember. Grief, it's normal. Everyone experiences grief at some point of their lives in some form or another. Also remember, it hurts a lot. And there's a lot of different feelings and emotions that come with grief and loss. Just knowing this, knowing that it hurts, it's all right. Keep that in mind. Grief and loss is different for everyone. And so maybe you don't feel as sad about the situation as the next person. Or maybe you feel like intense sadness and anger, frustration, and everyone else doesn't seem to be as affected by it. And that's okay. Everyone goes through this process differently. So just keep that in mind. Don't try to compare yourself to others. Also, know that it's unpredictable. We don't know what the grieving process is always going to look like. We had those stages of grief listed there. And it seemed pretty easy. You just go from one step down to the next, but it's pretty unpredictable and things can happen in the middle and we can circle back to that first stage again. Um, and so just knowing that it's unpredictable, um, it's all right. Overall, remember that healing takes time and please be patient with yourself. And then ask for help if needed. Um, Sometimes we can feel really alone and sad in this journey, but ask for help. Reach out to someone, whether it's a friend, family, a mental health counselor, anything like that. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Once again, if you want to talk to the counseling center or one of our counselors a little bit more about maybe your experience, maybe the grief and the sadness that you're experiencing right now, don't hesitate to either stop in our office and set up an appointment. You can also give us a call, email us, or even check out more for more information that might be on our website there. So thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope you got something out of it, and we look forward to working with you. Thanks.